Hello, I am talking to Lalenja Harrington, who was one of the attendees of the S2S mentoring program. And I want to thank you, Lalenja, for joining me for this conversation, for taking time out of your very busy schedule, for joining me for this conversation. Basically, what I want this to be is a very informal dialogue between us so that people who might be considering doing S2S might have a sense of what to expect. And although everybody's experience will vary, but it would be helpful for them to hear from multiple different perspectives in terms of how that journey was for people. So I'm going to open up with what prompted you to work with me and what issues do you think I could help you with?
Okay, great. So I think what initially really grabbed me was how you described the kind of focus of your work, which was social justice. And I think my experience in academia so far, I have found myself trying to figure out how to balance that push that's always going to be there. That I'm not willing to sacrifice. And how do you balance that with kind of the academic, just all of the stuff, that comes along. So I was really excited about the possibilities of exploring and whatever guidance and knowledge that you might have to offer in that area. So that's what initially pulled me.
The justice-oriented perspectives. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. That's very cool. Did you work with an academic consultant before working with me? No, so I was the first. Okay. Would there be any kind of criteria or situation that would have prevented you from working with an academic consultant? Like, what would be like a deal breaker for you?
Well, I think if it was outside of something I could afford,
okay,
would definitely be a deal breaker. And I will say that initially I was not sure that I would be able to, even be able to afford your services, but you were willing to work with me around that, and that made it possible for me, and I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah.
So kind of like right off the bat, that's the first thing. And then I think if they're not philosophically aligned,
right,
that would be a deal breaker. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those would probably be the biggest.
Okay. There's a little bit of a static noise reverberation from your end. I'm not sure what that is. Like everything you're saying, it's coming up a little bit of something else, like a little bit of air noise around you, and I'm not sure what that is, but just wanted to bring to your attention. And to our viewers, hopefully this will be edited out. If not, it's fine. It is the organic way in which humans communicate, and that is what is happening right now.
Is this better?
Is that better? Much better. So thank you for doing that. Can you share with me the information that you gained from our time together for your work? Can you share with me how might have you used that information moving forward?
So much. The work that we did around our conceptual map and framework, it helped. It was a shift. It was an absolute shift for me in my thinking around my scholarship, and it was. I'm very embodied. So for me, it just was like, it brought together pieces. You talk, a lot about the fragmentation that happens for us in the academy. And so for me, it was a coming together of the different pieces of me. I've been trying to do that. And I'd been thinking about it and was aware of that fragmentation and what I had kind of come up against in the resistance that I have experienced in these spaces, higher ed spaces. But there was just something about the exercise itself, as well as the space, as well as our meetings. And it was not just my own individual work, it was also being able to witness the brilliance of other folk. I was so inspired by everyone in those Saturday sessions. And then being able to watch you kind of your mentoring of folk and see those ahas for other people was also really inspirational, and I feel like helped to unlock unlock something for me that has truly shifted the trajectory for me of my scholarship in a way that is really resonant and centered and feels very grounded.
I love that. But one thing I noticed that I didn't even ask you your academic position and what you do and where you work. So maybe this is a good time to share what you do, because then we can ground it even more, like what this map did for your specific work.
Yeah, sure. So for about 14 years, I have been in a director position, working with a post-secondary education certificate program that supports students with intellectual disabilities. So it's a part of this kind of national movement for access. So advocacy and, kind of social justice has been at the center of that work, for me. I've been working in solidarity with folks within the disability community for my entire career. But what I was finding is that it was really difficult to bring into alignment kind of the disability studies and then my own, as a Black woman, my own lens. I was really struggling with how that informs the work that I was doing and within the disability community. So that felt very fragmented to me. And I was feeling some resistance within that community because there's such a focus on best practice. There's such a focus on, these outcomes. And I really was trying to trouble that and disrupt that and coming up against some walls around that, just as far as thinking about federal regulations and kind of what they're looking for out of these programs. And it just felt, it just was out of alignment with how I work and kind of see the world. So I had been real frustrated with that. And then I got my PhD. And as a part of that journey and process, I was starting to kind of work with those pieces. I was bringing, Black feminist theory into conversation with critical disability studies and art also, because for me, that's the knowledge, producing knowledge through the artistic process has been a part of my life forever. So what was happening is, and I even have a Venn diagram, of like all of these pieces, but it still wasn't realizing itself kind of through me. It still felt very fragmented. So in that role, I had been struggling with that, got my PhD, and then now I am in a lecturer. I have moved into a lecturer position and kind of in the process of getting my degree and kind of transitioning, and through the work with you, that the fragments have come together.
Love that. I know the moment that I saw your map when they came together, when you finally said, can I bring my prior theater background with with my embodied understanding, with all of this other theoretical conceptual ideas, and I'm like, of course, of course, of course, of course. And then it just was such an easy yes for me. But, it just, how long does it take to say yes? Like less than a second. And it opened up a whole world for you. And then the next week you came in with this soul blueprint, is what I call it. It's your soul's blueprint, and all of a sudden everything became aligned and you were congruent with the work that you're doing with language and shape and formations and tentacles coming out of it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that was, from my witnessing your growth, that was a very pivotal moment for you.
It was absolutely pivotal. And it makes me a little emotional. I wasn't expecting that. Sorry. I'm like 50 years old, and it's taken this long to find that congruence. Yeah. And it is something that is deeply, deeply meaningful for me. And it was very much, I remember leaving that session, and what prompted for me was, I am the data.
Yeah.
I am the data. Because I had been divorcing myself.
Yeah.
Right? I had been, and that's what felt so, and I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out, how do I bring me, into this so that it doesn't feel so distant and it doesn't feel so, and that clicked. And it was hearing that, but also seeing the other folk in the session go, ah. And so those affirmations in the chat and all of that was a part of it. And I went away and I just sat with that. And I really sat with, what is that truth for me? If I am the data, what does that look like for me? And I knew that was in my body. Mm-hmm. I knew that it was in my body. And so I just let go. And I just thought about, what are all of the different ways that my body knows when I'm in alignment? How do what is that like? What does it feel like? What is, and that's what prompted me to, for the image, to bring in the images and the image of myself, to center myself. Mm-hmm. And the analysis was like mind-blowing for me. And I've come across other things in my time, and like I could get it here intellectually, but there was just something, it clicked. It just absolutely clicked. And since that time, I'm teaching a class on Black women's liberatory praxis, and I'm reading these texts in a whole new way.
Right.
It's amazing. And so what's coming out of it, like, is a whole new area of scholarship for me, just around the reclamation of these ideas of the erotic with Lord, and what does that mean, and kind of queer, poetic, reading, and I'm thinking about critical Ubuntu, like, what does that mean? How can we revision? I've been trying to think through, so inclusion, I've been wanting to trouble that for a long time. Right. And so I'd come up with this, looking at the word and kind of breaking it down and thinking about, what does it look like if it's interclusivity? And it was getting there, but it still wasn't right. It still wasn't, because I felt the limitations of the language, the limitations of of where that language was even coming from. Right. Yeah. And so that recentering of myself, and because I am now reading things differently, it like opened, I was like, oh, that's what Ubuntu is. It's inclusion. And now it's just this whole nother area of research that I'm so incredibly excited about. So it was significant.
I mean, I love that you said that language was not sufficient, because, English language has its own history, and some very violent history, right?
Yes.
And and your body has its own wisdom. And we just paused and said, let's go to the body's wisdom before we language it.
Yeah.
That's what we did. And then there was sort of like you seeing yourself with, deep love and curiosity and compassion.
Mhm.
And then it was such a special homecoming to self that everything emanated from that. It was a homecoming.
That's a beautiful way to frame that. Yeah.
And it's just, you saw yourself in this sacredness of you.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything emanated from that. And then, I mean, you were just going, then there was no stopping. Then here's this piece, and here's this piece, and here's this piece. And you were just like flying after that point. It took us some time to get there, but once you were there, it was, it was fine. Which brings me to a very easy next question is, what results or changes or shifts have you seen in yourself and your work based on our time together?
Yeah, and I think, this change, this kind of new opening up of scholarship for sure, but also not just that, also in my own practice.
Yeah.
And my practice as an educator, as a teacher, as a creative, as a researcher, it just, that opening up is not limited to, that opening up kind of impacts all, all parts of me and my life. And again, I think it is allowing me to find and hear and experience information in different ways, so I just feel like now there's just this coming in of information. I'm really the Prentice Hill's Embodiment Institute is like, it's just like a continuation. I'm just finding these beautiful resources that are a continuation of this journey. Yeah.
That's lovely. It seems like you had expanded an awareness about yourself in a very embodied way. And from there, you created this sort of soul blueprint of your existence on earth, your calling, your purpose, and you no longer had to fragment the creative you versus the Black you versus the advocate you versus the discrete you. None of that was split anymore. It's all was one. It just sort of came all into one. And you didn't say like, if I do this, I can't do this. If I do this, I will shut down this part of me. You just sort of like brought it all together and said, this is all me. And if I work, I work from this place of wholeness of me.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
And that expanded awareness from what you're saying says that allows you to now see work differently, allows you to now respond to opportunities differently, and allows you to see possibilities in a very different lens, in a more expanded way than you did before. Because if you're fragmented, then you're seeing things from this lens and you're like, this is my path. And now you're like, all of this is my path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All of these are my options. I mean, you know what your path is. You're not distracted in your path. I meant like all of this is in your realm of possibilities. You get to choose now what gives you the best. Hell yeah, I'm going here.
Yeah.
I'm doing this, What part of the process, and you may have already answered that, so I'm just circling back to see if I heard it correctly. What part of the process did you like the most in working together?
It's so funny because we learn as much from our resistance. What we resist is what we embrace, right? And so there were some of the homeworks that I found myself really kind of resonating with. I didn't expect to find in the Why I Write. I didn't expect to find what I did, but I loved it. And so that was really joyful for me. I can't remember the name of it now. You ask us a series of all of the questions about our work. It's essentially kind of about our why and purpose. And it was a lot of questions. And I started answering them and I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
you know, and so you I appreciated that you were like, why this isn't enough, this isn't sufficient, this is not really answering the question, this is to kind of bring me back to that. And then really that was an opportunity for me to think, okay, what is it? Why am I resisting this? Why, you know, why? So I appreciate those opportunities to do that. So that, like, why I write was wonderful. Of course, the mapping was everything for me. Being able to, and I have shown this actually in one of my classes, because the journey from the very first thing the very first outline that I submitted to get some feedback on, and then it was like the different iterations of it were a literal reflection of what was happening for me. You know, so being able to have that and see that was really significant. And then the sessions on Saturday were so meaningful to me in a way that I wasn't expecting. I typically am skeptical of spaces, and I come into spaces kind of armed. And so I was so moved by what I was feeling in that space that it has become a part of what I think about as far as alignment for me. Like, I'm in this class that I'm teaching this semester. My goal is to help to hold this container, to kind of facilitate a space that makes room for folk to hopefully experience some of the, you know, kind of some of the same ahas, because it's so important. We don't have them. You know, we don't have them. And so it's impacted me in multiple ways.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so important to me that people feel like, while it's a nurturing space, that I'm also challenging them to grow, and that can all sometimes come into tension with each other, you know.
But I love it. It's great.
And I'm usually like, go deeper. There's more underneath this. You don't have to be studenting for me, you know, just go deeper, be raw, be messy, be whatever, but just go deeper. And it's much more illuminating than giving me a perfect answer for something, you know.
I mean, and so for me personally, that's a process that I love. I love the messiness. I embrace it. So that works for me. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but that works for me.
And a lot of people wouldn't be willing to go as emotionally deep as I was doing, because people would be like, I just need to figure out how to write and publish. You know, but the reasons that people are blocked and not in flow aren't related to writing only. They're related to a lot of other things, you know, and unless we sort that out a little bit and really mirror back like what keeps you in flow, you can do as many writing groups and retreats and everything, nothing really will come together properly, and you're going to perpetually be burning out, you know, trying to face something because you're not in congruence, you're fragmented. And that's why I find like a lot of people, especially women of color, are getting so fatigued and burnt out and diseased on the job. And I just wanted to create a more healthier, nourishing space for all of us, you know, so that we have a lot of self-compassion for us, and then by extension other people benefit from that too, you know, as we move on. Absolutely. What would you say would be like the 3 benefits of working with me, particularly, specifically?
I would say your breadth of knowledge and so it is that it's the way that you bring that knowledge into the space and into your feedback in a way that is challenging and nurturing at the same time. That was really impactful for me. So just to be able to see your feedback and hear how you gave feedback to other people, like that was a really important part of the mentorship for me. Just to kind of see how that can happen in a nurturing way, and from a place of deep knowledge around, and because I trust, I just the questions that you ask tell me, oh, you have a deep knowledge of this. Yes. Okay. So there's that. So that's one piece. Then the opportunity and the support from you in doing the deeper work, and the acknowledgement that this is important and it is of value. So that was important to me. And then, so breadth of knowledge and how you give feedback, the support to do the work more deeply, and with compassion, and the space, your facilitation of space and your commitment to the mind, body, spirit, connection, really resonated with me. So
that's really good to hear. It's always good to know, like, what, I haven't one intention of creating the program and delivering it a certain way. It's always helpful for me to know how it landed and what people or what people thought had landed. And what would you say to somebody who's considering the S2S program, maybe on the fence about it? What would you say to them if, for them to sort of move over to, like, yes, I want to definitely do this? Like, what is the thought shift you think needs to happen?
I would say, really, because it's an investment, and I know that's significant for folk, and so I would say, for me, because I can't speak to what, but I would say for me it was worth the investment. And like, I loved that your top 10, the 10 reasons why you were, like, that's so important. So I would really encourage folk to think about and to value themselves and that they, I would I would say, if you're really looking for an opportunity to dig more deeply into beliefs that you may hold or think that you hold, about yourself and what motivates you, and that this is an opportunity to explore that in a deeper way that could absolutely impact your work. Sorry, this is I do say this to folk because I talk about my experience with you, and I talk a lot about how meaningful it was for me as a woman of color to be mentored by another woman of color, and to be able to have access to the space with other folk, because my group was predominantly women, and women with different cultural knowledge that they were bringing into the space, and that was priceless. That was priceless.
I know. I love that. Like, I loved that I say what I do, and then I see who comes to me, who is magnetized to me. And to see who's magnetized to me lets me know I'm in integrity, because when I think of the pain of academics that might not be in congruence, I often think about how heteronormative, patriarchal, colonial, anti-Black structures within higher ed fragment all of us. So when I talk about calling those fragmented parts and coming to a place of wholeness, some of the folks that are most affected by these interconnected systems of oppression are multiply marginalized people.
Right.
And to think that they have heard the message and they're coming to me with that understanding, tells me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing too. It doesn't mean that it excludes anyone. It just was open. It wasn't like I excluded anyone. It's just who heard the message loudly was really and resonated with it was really telling, And so that was really helpful to see that for myself, for my own feedback as well. I know we did wellness sessions, so I want to just touch us very quickly on the wellness session. How did you respond to the wellness session? Because it's not therapy, but you had a wellness coach.
Right. And so I was uncertain about what to expect from that. As someone who has been through many years of therapy, I know I'm very familiar with that kind of mode of engagement. And so I wasn't sure. So knowing this wasn't necessarily that definitely wasn't therapy, but that there were going to be probably some therapeutic aspects of it. I wasn't sure how to show up in the space. I wasn't sure about what to expect. So I appreciate that there was, and I will say, again, resistance there, or skepticism, and kind of like, okay, what's this about? Like, where's this? So there was space made for it to kind of be whatever needed to be in the moment. And ultimately, that's what's most important to me. I did not feel pushed. And I feel like there was space to kind of wander and find the things that I needed to hear. And that. So I appreciated this space, but I am so used to that kind of work that it wasn't like an aha for me, kind of like, oh, you know what I mean? But it's always wonderful to have the space and take advantage of the space, kind of the support, if that makes sense.
So for people who don't know, the wellness coach that Lalenja is talking about is my partner, Dr. Paul Maxfield, and he is a trained counselor, although he's not offering counseling or therapy, but he's offering wellness coaching. And the purpose of that was that I wanted people to have another space to go talk to a different type of professional, to understand the wholeness of their lives, not just like, okay, I need to do this for this academic goal, but to understand like what's happening in all parts of their life that is influencing each part in whatever way. So everybody gets a 360 wellness assessment in the beginning. Everybody gets to talk about different things. And then, to tell you a little bit of back end story, I wanted it to be like you come out and you get a wellness plan coming out, because I wanted something tangible. And then Paul said, no, I just want to work with them however which way it needs to unfold instead of putting a structure on it. His wisdom. So a lot of times he wouldn't hear from me what I was experiencing with you all. He wanted to have his own fresh perspective, so he wasn't influenced by me. So that if both of us had similar perspective, then it would be a very powerful experience for the person. But if it felt like we talked to each other, we never did. I mean, we did afterwards, but we never did in advance of it, so that, he knew a certain lens with which to go in. Now, if there was something mentioned in that meeting that I needed to hear, of course, I heard it, but he went in fresh with a fresh pair of eyes so that he can offer fresh insight without being influenced by, whatever way I saw the situation. So I always find that interesting. I've been married to him since my assistant professor years. So I have benefited from his wisdom. There's something about like, the freedom with which white folks think that I have extracted that sort of channeling to say like, why not me? Like a lot of times he will have insight that sometimes I don't think about those insights because it's not in my realm of possibility. And then he'll bring it to you and they're like, yeah, why am I not doing that? Why have I talked myself out of this? And And sometimes he asks really very curious questions, that just like unsettling a little bit, and he's just real super curious. And I find myself going like, how dare you ask me that question, but I appreciate his inquiry because it gets me on a journey of self-reflection.
Right.
And my goal for this program was to offer the people that I'm mentoring the resources I have, and I've benefited from. And so he's one of my support systems. So I wanted you all to experience my support system a little bit as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important, significant that as a part of this, what a lot of folk would just kind of see, oh, this is just an academic mentorship, but your commitment to wholeness.
Yeah.
And so even just having this as an option, as a resource for folk, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I find it, really interesting that you discussed a lot of things about homecoming, wholeness, listening to yourself, listening to your talents, and all of these things. And yet I know you developed in your skills too. I know there was a lot of development in your skills. It reflected back in your writing that you were producing and all of that. But it's so cool that you're like, yeah, I got the skills, but really this is the most important thing that I got. Like skills are secondary, and I just find that very interesting we had like a good 4 weeks for skill development in the program. And you developed your skills too. It's just so super interesting that, the anchor point for you was the homecoming piece of it.
Yeah, and I think that's what I needed at that time. I think if I were to come back and do this again, then I think there would be a different focus for me. And I think because of the clarity that I have now, then I would be looking at that skill development in a different way.
Yeah, for sure.
So now, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom and knowledge and experience. And I know that people who are listening would very much benefit from such deep thoughts that you shared with them. Thank you so much, Lalenja.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Thank you.